Good evening, everybody. I am Kim Coble. I'm the Executive Director for the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, and we are thrilled you could join us tonight. I think it will be a very busy but exciting evening as we officially launch our 2022 climate agenda. Few housekeeping items before we jump into it. If you need Spanish interpretation, it is available, and you can click the button at the bottom of the screen to access that. And if you have any trouble with that, go ahead and put a note in the chat and we'll pick it up that way. Additionally, if you have any questions along the way, we are going to take question and answers at the end. However, please write them down and submit them through the Q&A button as you think of them, and we'll put them in the queue and manage them at the end. Let's see. Let's talk about what we're doing tonight. First of all, I'm very honored to, we will have Stacey Hartwell, who I'm honored to call a board member of Maryland LCV. I'm proud to call her a friend as well. And more importantly, she's representing the NAACP and will be talking to us about the critical nexus between climate and justice and how they're one and the same. We'll next be followed, very honored to have the chairs of the House and Senate Environment Committees with us, Chair Barve and Chair Pinsky, and they'll be sharing kind of what we can expect during the legislative session. Next, we'll have Emily Frias from CCAN, who will briefly go over the process that has been used to establish the agenda and the platform, and will be followed by specific policy advocates that'll be talking about energy goals, the building and transportation sectors. Lastly, Lindsay Mendelsohn of the Sierra Club will talk about what's next and what we can do to help. We will then follow it up with the questions and answers. So as I said, it's going to be busy, but it's pretty exciting.
Kim, I think we're going to take 1 second just to translate that into Spanish before we start our interpretation service. So Marisela, do you want to go ahead?
Sí, vamos a activar el botón de interpretación. Lo que vamos a estar haciendo hoy es tener la interpretación simultánea para todo. La señora Cable ya dio toda la presentación de quienes están aquí atendiendo y tengo entendido el botón de interpretación va a ser activado. I just want to confirm we are going to activate the simultaneous interpretation now.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Marisela. Before I turn it over to Stacey, I would like to make a point that I hope you keep in mind tonight and throughout the 2022 legislative session. Unfortunately, just this week, we have had a very vivid and horrific examples about the impacts of a changing climate. They speak to the magnitude of work that is ahead for us, and that magnitude can feel daunting, and it speaks to the urgency of needing to do this work. It will take nothing less than courageous leadership from our elected officials, from our business representatives, from our organizations, and from each and every one of us. And I encourage you tonight to keep a list as we go through the conversations about the items and the places and opportunities where you're inspired to engage. And we'll work with you on that list to make sure that you can access these points all throughout the session. And I believe that we will both have the opportunity to engage as well as the responsibility to help shift these impacts. As I said, Stacey Hartwell is a board member of Maryland LCV and with the NAACP. But she also formed her energy expertise as an energy advisor while employed with the energy giant and innovator Tesla. In doing so, she mounted the top-down, bottom-up strategies for increasing market share for solar. In November of 2019, she became the co-chair for the Environment and Climate Justice Committee with the NAACP Maryland State Conference. Stacey, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Kim, and good evening, everyone. You know, historically, climate and environment groups have worked to gain consensus and support on legislation relative to their priorities, and often worked in silos. This year, we have rallied together to set a legislative agenda in unison, an agenda created in concert to address climate in Maryland. You know, I don't know if you've ever heard the old adage, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. Now that's sort of a brain twister there, but so let me put it this way. Climate change has impacts against many issues: housing, education, finance, health, and more. We are seeing the devastating impacts of not addressing climate change more aggressively. Let's not forget the deadly and costly impacts of Hurricane Ida, especially in Annapolis. Isn't that something? Worst of all, statistics are confirming the impact of climate on overburdened BIPOC, that's Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC communities with higher percentages of people of color. For example, Baltimore has the highest rates of death related to air quality of any state. Prince George's County was rated an F for air quality by the American Lung Association. So with these big issues, we have to rethink our approach to legislative remedies. We didn't change our approach just for the sake of being different. We have to look at approaches and solutions in tandem and not linearly. We have had to leave our silos for amalgamated solutions. We must consider the cumulative impacts of climate change and do so collectively across many, many disciplines. Over the past few months, we tried a new strategic approach. The climate and environment community joined frontline communities, industry, institutes of higher education, and social justice advocates to develop a comprehensive climate platform that centered equity in its development and worked toward ambitious climate reductions. We are stronger together. What you hear tonight will be our unified voice. In doing our outreach during the planning process, it was imperative we include the voices of community members like Dr. Tracy Garrett. Dr. Garrett's community in Anne Arundel County is beset with multiple environmental issues. The area of Sands Road, which is the main traffic artery in Lothian, is referred to as a diesel death zone. Maryland has the nation's worst air pollution from cars, trucks, and buses after New York State. A Black child in Baltimore is 500 times more likely to die from asthma than a white child. We have the dubious distinction, as I mentioned earlier, of having the highest rates of death related to air quality in the country. Looking across the state, African Americans are exposed to 12 times more particulate matter from on-road air pollution, and Latinos are exposed to 11 times more particulate matter from on-road air pollution than the exposure for all Marylanders. These factors led to a growing community of advocates pushing to address this inequity through the adoption of the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, which would require a growing percentage of vehicles sold to be zero-emission vehicles. You're going to hear about that a little more this evening. The other policy we are galvanizing to support is the All-Agency Climate Equity and Labor Test. This all-agency climate equity and labor test built off the success of the Public Service Commission, or PSC, consideration of climate and labor that called on the PSC to consider climate and labor in its permitting decisions. As a community, we believe all permitting decisions should be made with our climate communities and our workers at the forefront. We are calling for all agencies to consider climate and ensure their permitting decisions align with our state's climate goals. We are also standing with our union brothers and sisters to ensure state workers are uplifted in their decision-making with family-sustaining wages and benefits. Yet most importantly, we need to ensure that communities that are overburdened with industry, pollution, and communities that have been historically marginalized are protected. Just imagine if we had this in place when project approval and permitting decisions were made in Prince George's County, where they have the state's only sewage sludge incinerator, multiple landfills, asphalt, aggregate construction industries, and not one, not two, but 3 gas or coal-fired power plants. talk about cumulative impacts. I mean, you know, and interestingly, these stressors are only paralleled in other predominantly BIPOC communities in the state. Prince George's County also has the highest ozone levels in the state. While the county represents 16% of the state's population, it makes up 20% of all COVID-related deaths. During the COVID crisis, communities like Brandywine, which sits at the convergence of two major trucking and construction routes, and Curtis Bay in Baltimore, faced a double crisis of air pollution, and COVID-19 directly correlated to higher morbidity rates. Curtis Bay has been named one of the most polluted communities from industrial pollution. And on the Eastern Shore, where residents suffer from the severe health impacts of concentrated animal feeding operations, you might hear the acronym CAFOs. It's concentrated animal feeding operations, in addition to sea level rise and sunny day flooding. We hope we can work with you and stakeholders from the community to ensure that we are protecting these communities from further environmental stressors by safeguarding them with additional screening and permitting process. Yet more than protecting these communities from further harm, we must begin to repair these communities and make direct investments in overburdened communities. We have a tremendous opportunity to be a leader, not only in climate, but also in making Maryland a leader on environmental justice. Lastly, I want to leave you with a quote from my soror and sister in the Links Incorporated, Vice President Kamala Harris. We know that we cannot achieve health justice, economic justice, racial justice, or educational justice without environmental justice. We look forward to working with you to protect our climate and our communities. Enjoy this evening, and thank you.
Stacy, thank you. As always, inspiring and informative. I want to note that we have almost 170 people on this call and counting, so we've got quite an audience here. And with that, I would like to introduce our keynote speakers of sort. We have Chairman Kumar Barve, House Chairman of the House Environment and Transportation Committee, District 17, Montgomery County. And we have Chair Paul Pinsky from District 22, Prince George's County of the Senate Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee. And the two of them are going to share with us what we can be looking forward to seeing in our 2022 General Assembly. Chairs, turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, Chair Barve, let me very briefly start and to give an overview. First of all, thank all of you for attending tonight. Thank Kim and Stacy for the great work they do and the laser focus they have us place on environmental justice and sustainability. We're going to come to the legislature with a number of bills to address climate change. And I think the two watchwords are urgency and boldness. We have no time to waste. As was alluded to, Western Kentucky was just a very sad situation, and we can't continue to have those situations. We can't have more flooding. We can't have the heat waves we saw in the Pacific Northwest. We can't have the sea level rise. We can't have the saltwater intrusion. So together, the Senate and the House, Chairman Barve and myself, and many other of our colleagues are committed to coming up with a bill that does many things. But let me focus on two. One are broad goals. We need to set explicit, clear goals of reduction of greenhouse gases. We're suggesting 60% reduction by 2030 and carbon neutral by 2045. And there'll be discussions about those numbers. I understand that. But besides the broad umbrella goals, we have to call for concrete actions. We can't just talk about things. We, in our bill, we want to have the state fleet be all electric. We would like all school buses to be electric. We would like to have a green bank. We would like to have a new urban climate justice group, I guess you'd call it a cluster of people who can work in the communities. We want to electrify all of our buildings. We want to address a number of issues, and Chairman Barve will get into that in a moment. But we want to talk about the general goals and very concrete actions. We have to hold people accountable. We don't know who will be governor next time. I have my preference in terms of party, but we need to hold whoever is governor very clear and consistent that they have to make certain marks. We have to show the rest of the nation that Maryland will be a leader, will not be a follower. Historically, Maryland was a leading state in the country. We have to put ourselves back there again. I don't want to take a lot of time today, but I want to make another point, and this gets to the 174 of you. You know, you can have great public policy. You can have some decent leaders, elected leaders. You can have elected representatives. But at the end of the day, we need you. You know, the grassroots is crucial to this. We need thousands of people writing postcards, sending emails, coming to Annapolis, if you're vaxxed, to put pressure and let people know there's no other direction we're going to go but forward on climate change. You know, there's an election year next year. And every legislator, all 188, need to know that the voters in their district, the activists in their district, will accept nothing less than a strong, urgent, bold piece of legislation. So whereas there are 176 of you, if you each affect 6 other people, if you get 6 other people to write emails, to have small group meetings that are in with safe distance, with masks, et cetera, that's 1,000 people. We can't do it alone. You know, Chairman Barre or myself or many of our colleagues can give an impassioned speech on the floor of the center of the House. It might sway a few, but I have to tell you, the people who will sway them the most are their voters. There are some people who are enlightened who understand the need for this, but unfortunately there are some who will put their finger up and check it to see which way the wind is blowing. You've got to let them know that the wind is blowing at our backs and that we're going to take aggressive stands. We're going to be with President Biden, and we're going to start to make change in this country, starting with Maryland. We have a lot of shoreline, the coast, the bay, and those storms coming up the bay do a lot of damage. And when in Annapolis or the Inner Harbor, a business can't open their doors because of flooding, it's affecting our economy. It's affecting our farmers who are losing acres each day to saltwater intrusion. This is very real. It is very imminent. But we can't do it alone. And I'm pleased to know that there are now 177 of you. But you can't stand on the sidelines or come to one Zoom call. I'm asking you to do whatever you can over the next 100, 120 days to make sure this happens and get it across the finish line. We want all of our colleagues to wherever they turn to look at people or hear from them by phone, by email, who said, don't come home, don't run for re-election unless you're ready to vote for and pass significant climate change and put Maryland in the lead. So thank you for your commitment, your engagement, and I look forward to working with you over the coming session, and I'll pass it on to Chairman Barbe. I'm going to have to excuse myself. I'm at another event. I'm pulling out of that event to jump back in. So thank you for your work. Chairman Barbe.
Thank you, Senator.
Chairman Pinsky, it's a great honor to work with you. Before you leave, I just want to say, now that we don't have COVID, I've really enjoyed actually meeting with you in a room where we get to talk about protecting the environment, and it's worked really great. We've had 4 meetings so far. We're going to have many more, but thank you very much, Senator Pinsky. And let me just continue on the line that you began. Of course, it's hard to improve upon the things that the Senator says, but let me just emphasize a few things. First of all, we all have homework assignments. Paul and I are going to present to the legislature and to the people of Maryland a bold, comprehensive vision for climate, for fighting climate disruption. It's going to start here in Maryland, and it's going to be one of the most well thought through, and it's going to be good not just with respect to the environment, it's going to be great with respect to engineering and economics. It's going to be something that people around the United States of America can copy. That's part of our leadership objective here. But we all have homework assignments, and let me suggest a few homework assignments to the many people here who are on this Zoom call who you've been activists for a very long time, and we don't have any victories without your hard work. But let me suggest a few things that I think would be very, very useful. We all have friends in rural parts of the state of Maryland, Western Maryland, the Eastern Shore, It's important for all of us, me, Paul, all of you, to go through your Facebook, go through your contact list and start to actually talk to people and explain to them why these comprehensive climate solution bills are so important for the state of Maryland, for America, and for the entire world. And you will find a surprising number of people who you thought might be conservative or hesitant are really not conservative or hesitant on these issues. You need to encourage them to talk to people. You know, let me draw an analogy here with the fracking fight that we had several years ago. In my committee, a number of Republican members of the legislature in my committee voted to ban fracking. Why did they do that? They did it because their constituents were worried about fracking in their community, and they communicated that to them. And so I had, you know, I believe at the end of the day, the vote was 22-2 in favor of banning fracking in my committee. That was only possible because of you. And Paul and I are calling upon you to pull out the stops again for that. Now, let me also say, it's not enough to pass a really good set of laws or one law. It's also important for us to understand that we have hard work to do every day. It's the old slogan of think globally and act locally. Well, I have to tell you, unfortunately, here in Montgomery County, Maryland, a bastion of liberalism, a bastion of environmental concern, we've got a school system that is right now building schools that are not environmentally sound. They're deciding not to do geothermal energy, even though it would pay for itself in 7 years and save $16 million in energy costs over the course of 30 years. They don't want to relocate a sports field for 1 year. Now, think about this for a moment. What are we teaching our children when we make decisions like this? I really want you to be engaged, not just with us here in Annapolis. We definitely need that. But I need you to be engaged back home to make sure that you support using good technologies in building schools, using solar power where it's appropriate and where it's cheap. And, you know, together we can win all these battles over the next 10 years because we have 5 or 10 years and that's about it. And so we have to act immediately. And so I want to thank you, all of you, for all the help you've given us in the past and in advance for all the help you're going to give us in the future in passing all these climate bills that we're going to try to nail down. One last thing I do want to talk to you, I want to bore you with a little bit of constitutional nuance here, but I know you can handle it. We have to pass this bill soon in the General Assembly session, put it on the governor's desk so that if he vetoes it, we'll have time to override his veto now before we adjourn, because if he vetoes this bill after we adjourn, it's dead until after the election. So we simply cannot wait. We have to do this fast. And Paul and I are both committed to that, and we need your help to do that as well. So thank you. That's really all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Chair Barve and Chair Pinsky. And if you have I believe the senator might have had to drop off, but
Yeah.
Delegate Barr, if you can stay on for a minute, we have two questions for you. So let me first call on Nina Jeffries.
Hello. Hi, Delegate Barve. I'm so excited to be here with you today, and thank you for taking my question.
Sure.
I've been working with the Mary Perg Student Climate Action Coalition on the Future Act, which would commit public universities to net zero by 2035, as well as create an environmental and economic justice scholarship fund. My question is, how are you as a legislator going to make sure that the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act goals are updated to meet the current climate emergency needs, as well as bringing in the role of public schools and universities?
Well, first of all, our goal as a broad principle is to electrify everything. And the reason for that is very simple. First of all, we need to keep fossil fuels in the ground where they can't harm us. And secondly, even if you have a dirty grid today, that grid is getting cleaner as the years go by. And so electrification is very important. My wife and I both drive electric cars. But, you know, the fact of the matter is we have to make it affordable for everybody in the state of Maryland. We have to electrify buildings, new buildings, and we have to start immediately. And so That's the first most important thing. The climate solution fleet of bills that we're going to be passing, it's going to be one bill in the Senate and several bills in the House. They are all aimed at dramatically reducing the carbon intensity of Maryland's economy. And so we are very much with you in your goal there. We want to electrify buildings and cars, and we want to decarbonize the economy. And we believe we can do it without costing anybody any money. This is not a trade-off of, oh, you have to pay more money in order to have less carbon. We believe we have a pathway for doing both of those things without having to burden consumers with additional costs.
Thank you. Thank you, Nina. And Jamal Lewis has a question.
Jamal, where are you?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Good afternoon, Chair. I'm Jamal Lewis with the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative. I've appreciated working with you over the years. My question, I really appreciate that your goal is to electrify everything. And I recognize that buildings make up a huge portion of the fossil fuel consumption in our state. So I'm curious and would love for you to talk about how you're going to ensure that the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act addresses existing buildings in a way that doesn't, as you just mentioned, does not disproportionately impact the folks who it's already disproportionately impacting.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act of 2009 and 2016 didn't really address buildings at all. It just kind of globally addressed carbon reduction for the whole state. In these bills, we are actually going to specifically address buildings. It's our goal to see to it that we have a future where new buildings are electric, new schools are electric, and as boilers break down and as things go bad in buildings, as you have to retrofit, that you need to retrofit toward electrification. And one thing, I think that you didn't specifically bring it up, but I will say this, that the statistics appear to indicate that for people who live in urban settings, nearly 85% of the inhaled pollution, and especially particulate pollution, comes from vehicles. And so as we begin to electrify vehicles and transit, we will immediately have a positive impact upon people who live in urban settings. And so, I really see these two goals as being very much in sync with one another. And it's not a question of having to make trade-offs, because they really are very synced up. And that's really the way I see it. And I think it's the way we all should see that.
Am I able to ask one follow-up question?
Yeah, go for it, man.
Awesome. So in the work that I've done and that GHHI does, we do a lot of lead abatement, mold remediation. We even do some weatherization as well. And what we're seeing in the buildings in the homes that we're retrofitting is that there's a lot of existing issues and existing hazards that can prevent the electrification or decarbonization of those homes. Will your bill have any resources to help assist with the transition of those homes and buildings?
We're hoping to, but let me tell you about one problem that we are running into, and I want to be honest with you. The cost of commercial construction and residential construction has gone up over the last 20 years. Partly it has to do with the economic boom in places like China and India and the use of metals like copper. But the cost of construction has gone up. And so we have to be very astute about how we do this. Regardless, however, when it comes to, well, first of all, getting lead out of living spaces in the state of Maryland has to be a top priority, because no pollutants are as deadly, especially to children, as lead is. And, you know, we've made a lot of stride. I don't want to pretend that the battle is over, because it's not. We've come a very long way over the last 20 years. We have further to go, but I don't want anyone to be confused about this point. I and my committee, and I know Paul Pinsky and his committee, are very committed to keeping the removal of lead at the top of our priority with respect to public policy. And so, but all these things are expensive, and we're going to have to just find the money from Build Back Better or from the temporary surplus that we appear to have for the next couple of years to try to address these issues. And I'm very committed to working with you, you and your colleagues on all of these things.
Thank you very, very
Thank
much,
you.
Delegate Barve, and Jamal. Thank you for joining us with the question. We could occupy Delegate Barve's entire evening, guaranteed, but we'll save that for another time. And I'm going to turn to Emily Frias of CCAN. Before I do that, I want to acknowledge that we have delegates Feldmark, Solomon, and Chi joining us tonight. So thank you very much, delegates, for being here. So with that, Emily, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to make sure that you can we see my screen? Great. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. My name is Emily Frias. I'm the Maryland Grassroots Coordinator at Chesapeake Climate Action Network. I'm going to talk just really briefly. We just heard from Senator Pinsky and Chairman Barve, just a little bit about their take on the political context. I just want to make sure that that all is very, very clear for our grassroots folks in attendance. And I also just want to talk a little bit about how we developed this platform and the process that we went through, because I think it's really incredible. Briefly, just want to say, I want to start by saying that this has to be the climate year. My colleagues have already reminded all of us about the environmental justice crises that we have an urgent need to solve. Here in Maryland, as has been mentioned, we are uniquely vulnerable to climate change with over 3,000 miles of coastline and so much of our land at or near sea level. But what's also really important to know is that we have tremendous opportunities in front of us to address these problems. I know many of you on this call have been fighting really hard for federal policies like the American Rescue Plan and the Build Back Better plan to work to tackle the problems that we face on a national scale at the scale that we really need them. And because of your hard work, we actually have more opportunity here in Maryland to capture that federal funding and make it work for our communities. Maryland actually closed out its fiscal year earlier this fall with a $2.5 billion budget surplus following the injection of federal funding during the pandemic. So we really can't use the excuse that we are not able to afford action on climate. Not that we could really use that excuse before that anyway, but in this case in particular, we have a budget surplus that we need to be aware of. Our state really needs to seize these opportunities and once again become leaders on this issue in our nation. But this will really only happen if our elected leaders feel the pressure, which I think Pinsky and Barve did such a good job of really illuminating that for us. This is the final year of this gubernatorial and General Assembly term, meaning that this is really the time to turn up the pressure and make sure that our leaders make good on their past campaign promises. This also means that business that's done this year can't be taken up again next year because we will have a new body. So if Hogan vetoes our priorities this session, we'll need to be able to respond as soon as possible with an override this legislative session. So that really, really increases the urgency to get our work done early. This will only happen if it's a priority of our leadership. And to make this a reality, we're going to have to push really hard and put all of our best ideas forward. So before I pass it to my colleagues to get more into what those great ideas are, let me just again briefly describe our process for arriving at this platform. So knowing that we had this huge political opportunity in front of us, Our partner groups worked together for months to develop and analyze policies that would truly make the emissions reductions and equity impacts that we need. This included several separate coalitions and stakeholder groups all coming together with the strongest platform together aiming to create the strongest platform that we could for the 2022 session. During the summer and fall, we formed 5 working groups, 4 to bring together stakeholders and experts to analyze specific sectors of the economy, and 1 to make sure those recommendations and ideas were workshopped with as many people as possible. During the course of our process, we analyzed over 40 policies. We reached out to over 2,000 individuals and 150 organizations through our survey efforts and conducted several focus groups across the state. I really hope that many of you on this call were able to participate in some form or another. After all that work concluded, we evaluated our policies on 3 criteria. Number 1, emissions impact. Number 2, equity impact. And number 3, political and implementation viability. What you're about to hear are some of the highlights resulting from this process and what we really think are the most important policies to be fighting for on climate this session. So with that, I'll turn it to my colleague from CCAN, Victoria Venable.
Thank you, Emily. How is everybody tonight? Thank you for having me. Next slide, perfect. So hi everyone, I'm Victoria with Chesapeake Climate Action Network. As you've already heard today, the 2022 climate platform aims to be comprehensive and transformative because we need to meet the moment that we are in. An overview of this, an overall theme of this platform is identifying and setting climate goals that match the urgency of the science and outlining a plan to meet those goals in a way that builds a healthier and more equitable world for Marylanders. So in Maryland, you can see here on our chart, the top 3 emitting sectors are transportation, electricity, and building fuel use. So to really tackle the climate crisis, we are calling on legislators to address these 3 areas. Next slide, please. So first, we need to update our climate goals and emissions accounting. You heard from our speakers earlier today, but just to highlight what we are talking about here, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has cited that wealthy nations like the United States must reduce emissions by 60% below 2006 levels by 2030. Moreover, we must reach net zero emissions by 2045 in order to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. Currently, Maryland's law only requires a 40% reduction. We need to update this goal and revise our methane accounting practices to match the science. Next slide, please. Great, and then to talk a little bit about our electricity and energy sector, all of our work to get off of fossil fuels and electrify our energy sector, as well as sectors like buildings and transportation, will require a strong and well-planned distribution grid. That's why we'll be supporting the GRID Act, which will define the state goals, including climate and renewable energy targets, that need to be met by our distribution grid and planning processes. It also ensures that federal funds that are coming are used for grid investments and that the process is done transparently and that the resulting jobs align with labor standards. We also want to make sure that our solar industry is accessible to people in low and moderate income households. So we want to do this by expanding access through the passage of tax incentives. These are just a few of our big highlighted energy and electricity sector policies. But with that, I will hand it over to my colleague Lori from the Climate Justice Wing to talk about the building sector.
Great, thank you, Victoria. I'm Lori McGilvray. I am the co-chair of the Climate Justice Wing of the Maryland Legislative Coalition. And I am really excited to tell you why buildings are such an important part of our strategy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and what we propose to do about it. So if you look at the pie chart, I know it's really small, but that red pizza pie shape is the building's contribution of our state's greenhouse gases. And that's about a little over 17% of the emissions. And that's just the direct emissions, like emissions from a furnace from buildings. So we have to make really big changes over the next 10 years. And what we're proposing is not just our own ideas, but really it's very similar to what the Maryland Commission on Climate Change Buildings Group has proposed in their most recent annual report. So to start, we have to just stop digging the hole deeper, which means we have to electrify the construction of new buildings, or new buildings need to be all electric. And then we have to dial back our energy use by improving efficiency of existing buildings. But we also need to electrify our buildings in a way that isn't going to just require more dirty energy, but where we're actually adding to the renewable electricity that we have in our state. For example, adding to rooftop solar. And then fourthly, and perhaps the most important, is that we need to be very mindful of the communities that have been impacted the most. So as we retrofit multifamily buildings and reduce energy use in single family buildings, we need to do that in a way that's really going to benefit communities of color and low income Marylanders. Exactly what Stacy was calling on us to do. So next slide. So what are the actual policy pieces of this, which we expect to be reflected and are proposing be reflected in legislation in the 2022 session? So first up, passing an all-electric new building construction code. This really means that we're building the right kind of buildings that are the buildings for our climate sensitive future. Then secondly, for large commercial multifamily state-owned buildings of greater than 25,000 square feet, and we're including schools, but I'm going to talk about that separately, we want to see building emission standards pass. And what I mean by building emission standards is really putting buildings on an energy diet so that they are improving their efficiency and lowering their energy use by things like adding insulation, new windows, upgrading their heating and cooling system to electric heat pumps, that kind of thing. And then fourth, and we have talked about low-income communities, and thank you, Jamal, passing a bill, and this would be reintroduced by Delegate Charkoudian, a low-income energy efficiency bill that actually addresses a legacy inequity that's been true in the Empower program, where low-income Marylanders are contributing more to that program than they are getting in the benefits. So the bill would increase the percentage of Empower funds that are going for low-income energy efficiency. And there's another piece of it that would create an interagency task force that would help to just coordinate the state's programs. And then finally, it's important to improve the kinds of materials that we're using to build buildings. And there will be a bill for requiring state buildings to use green concrete. This is a decarbonized material. Next slide. So for schools, first up, let's build the right schools. So require new K-12 schools to consume no more energy than produced so that they're becoming net zero. And in looking at places that have done this, we're seeing that they cost the same or in some cases less, especially if you consider the operation of them over time, than conventional schools. We also need to do for schools, K-12 schools, what we've talked about for other buildings, which is to improve their energy performance as well, with an aim of net zero over time. And then finally, as we heard earlier this evening, the Maryland university system also needs to be part of this solution and driving towards carbon neutral by 2035. And including improving electrification of university vehicles and adding a economic and environmental justice scholarship fund. So now I'll pass it on to Ramon Palencia Calvo from League of Conservation Voters to talk about transportation.
Thank you, Lori, and hello, everyone. Again, my name is Ramon Palencia, and I'm the Deputy Director of Maryland LCV. And in the next few minutes, I will be talking about transportation. This sector offers important opportunities to advance equity, community health, and climate change mitigation. Emissions from this sector are the largest source of climate pollution in Maryland, accounting approximately 40% of total emissions in the state. And Marylanders also experience significant health impacts from vehicle emissions, as we already heard. By addressing this sector, we can gain important health benefits. This is critical for communities that suffer disproportionately the effects of air pollution or are members of sensitive groups such as elderly or children. But we also need to address transportation policies that have perpetuated harms to BIPOC and underserved communities. Those policies directly impact access to good jobs, education opportunities, access to good, healthy foods, and contribute to public health issues such as smog, air pollution, and heat islands. So to address those problems, we have proposed 4 priorities that will result in improved health outcomes and advance equity and climate change mitigation. The first priority is the school bus electrification. There are more than 7,000 diesel school buses in Maryland. This is by far the largest fleet in the state, and diesel emissions from those buses are especially harmful to children and the communities that host bus depots. So this bill will provide the opportunity to expand the benefits of electric school buses with vehicle-to-grid technology to school districts across the state at no additional cost to the school system. And vehicle-to-grid technology can offer additional benefits to the same school systems. And this bill will also incorporate equity and labor provisions when deploying electric school buses. The second priority is the Transportation Equity Act. This bill will create a statewide plan to ensure that everyone can access affordable, convenient, and accessible transportation, regardless of race, income, zip code, or disability. It will require equity as a primary goal in the Maryland Transportation Plan and a thorough analysis including equity, health, and cost benefits. This effort will also require consultation with communities before major service changes and will create the Commission on Transportation Equity. Next slide, please. The next priority is advancing the clean truck rule. Trucks account for 10% of vehicles on roads, but are responsible for 30% of carbon emissions and almost 60% of particulate matter emitted by the entire transportation sector. Advancing the clean truck rule will require manufacturers to produce zero-emission trucks beginning in 2024 and increase their sales to anywhere from 40 to 75% of truck sales in Maryland, depending on the class of the truck, by 2035. Advancing the clean truck rule is currently the only binding mandate that Maryland can adopt to set requirements for sales of zero-emission trucks. Finally, introducing protections for MTA workers for the Zero Emission Bus Transition Act that passed the legislature and became law earlier this year. MTA employees and their union representatives understand what it will take to successfully transition to zero-emission buses. So they should be full participants in developing and implementing the plan to convert diesel to electric bus fleets. And the plan must require that MTA retains the current diesel bus workforce on electric bus retrains on electric bus technology and the retention of maintenance contracts to zero-emission buses. So by taking action on the largest source of climate emissions in Maryland, we have an incredible opportunity to address climate mitigation while also advancing equity and health outcomes for populations in the state. Thanks, and I will pass it on to King Cobble now.
Victoria and Lori and Ramon, thank you. I want to capture Chairs Barve and Pinsky use the word strong, urgent, bold, and comprehensive. And I think they unknowingly described the climate platform that we've developed and that these 3 colleagues of mine have presented to you. So look forward to talking with you a little bit more about that. Before doing that, however, I want to introduce Lindsay Mendelsohn of the Sierra Club, who's going to talk about next steps. And I know there's some questions about how to engage and where to engage. So Lindsay will be able to tell us that. And then we will open it up for question and answers. So keep those populating in the Q&A, and we'll funnel them back to the speakers. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kim. And hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Mendelsohn. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with the Maryland Sierra Club. And as we heard from Senator Pinsky and Delegate Barve, these bills can't just pass easily. We need a lot of people. All of your voices are really, really critical to getting this really ambitious package to the finish line. So you can make a huge difference this session, and through whatever ways you can help. There are many, many, many different ways, and we're going to share them with you right now. So the first thing is we have some key dates for events that are coming up. So stay tuned for more information about the first day of session rally on January 12th at 11:30. There's also going to be an environmental summit. The date should be January 25th. Stay tuned for more information on that. There's also going to be an Eastern Shore legislative preview on January 8th and 9th. And then there's also lobby nights that are also coming up. Sierra Club has a lobby night on February 3rd and 7th, and CCAN has one on February 17th and the 21st. If you have a lobby night that you're planning, please put it in the Q&A, and we'll be sure to capture that, and we can announce it at the end. Next slide. Also, we're going to share this link in the chat. This link will have all the information of all the events that we've talked about, the registration links where you can sign up for, but also the ways that you can volunteer. So if you're interested, there's so many ways to support these bills. You can do it from home, in person, talking on the phone. So things like writing letters to the editor, lobbying your legislators directly, virtually or in person, attending rallies, helping us reach our petition goals, posting on social media, text banking, writing written testimony, or testifying at the hearings. Some of these are ways that you can take action. Next slide. And I see Emily shared that sign up form in the chat, so you can take a look at that and please sign up. And then finally, there's some other general dates for the legislative session that you'll want to pay attention to. So the start of session is going to be January 12th. So it's right around the corner. So there's going to be a lot of ways you can take action even before session starts. So if you sign up on that form, we'll give you all that information. There's also something called crossover date, which is a really important date to make sure that one bill crosses over to the other chamber and passes, to have the best chances of that bill passing overall. That's March 21st. And then the last day of session is sine die on April 11th. And there'll be hearings on all of these bills. We don't know the exact dates, but if you sign up on the volunteer sign up form, we'll be sure to share those with you. And I'll turn it back to Kim.
Thank you, Lindsay. All right, we have a couple minutes here. So I am being fed some questions here. So let me turn and read them to the panelists here. And Lindsay, I'm going to start with you because we do have a couple follow-ups, and I'm going to capture these in one thought. But when folks are reaching out to state legislators, can you speak to how effective emails and tweets are? Additionally, we have an 11-year-old on the call today, and what can students and children do to help? They're not obviously voters, but they do have a voice, and they do frankly have the biggest future ahead of them. So how can they become engaged? And generally, what is the most effective way to influence a legislator? So can you just take a couple minutes on that?
Yeah, definitely. And other folks, feel free to chime in. So as we heard from Delegate Barve and Senator Pinsky, reaching out directly to your legislator is really important. They pay attention, they're elected by you, and so they're really going to pay attention to their constituents. So sending them a message through Twitter, sending them an email, they take a note of that. In some offices, they actually tally up the number of calls or emails and messages they're getting on those bills. So that is really important. And sorry, Kim, can you say the other question you got from that individual?
What about students and youth? How do they engage?
Yeah, so I think there's so many different ways. on the slides we shared earlier, attending rallies, writing letters to the editor, having your own lobby night. You can organize your own events, continue to speak out. There's so many different ways to take action. I think there's also a group called MSCAC, and I don't know, Emily, there might be an upcoming event, I believe, on lobbying, right?
So yeah, MSCAC is primarily, it is college students, but there are usually lots of, even at middle schools and high schools, there are green teams and groups, and I definitely recommend, you can always do everything you can personally, but really if you want to win, get your friends involved, organize and bring people with you, and you will make a much bigger impact. And I want to say that having worked in a legislative office, the tallying thing is completely correct. And having face-to-face meetings with your legislators is really one of the most impactful things you can do. So definitely attend the CCAN and Sierra Club lobby nights that Lindsay and I are organizing. I think that would be a really good thing for you to do.
Let me turn, and Ramon, there's some questions around school buses, and so I'm going to capture these here. One of them is simply about asking whether these bills will require state and local governments to buy only electric buses. So if you can specify or clarify what that is. But the other question is an interesting one around Baltimore City, which does not have public school buses. And so will the public transportation in Baltimore, which children use, be required or be part of this as well? So if you could speak to those.
Thank you, Kim. So yeah, in Baltimore City, so earlier this year, a piece of legislation required transition of all diesel to electric transit buses in the city of Baltimore, MTA buses that primarily operate in Baltimore City. So students starting in 2023, I believe, all new contracts for transit buses will be zero emissions electric. So students will be able to take advantage of zero emission buses in the city of Baltimore. For the second part of the question, so one of the main barriers to adopting this technology, already proven technology, is the upfront cost. It costs 2 to 3 times more an electric bus than a diesel counterpart. Although you say that additional cost during on the savings on maintenance and operations. But what this bill does is allow them to enter into this pilot project, and the additional cost, they will not incur in any additional cost. The utilities they're partnering with the utilities, and they'll cover the additional cost. So that's one of the way this bill works. But coming down the pipeline, we know that there's over $5 billion in federal funds coming to the states and contractors to transition these diesel to electric school buses. So it is very important that the school districts jump into this type of pilot projects to gain that experience needed to really scale up to the full fleet of buses.
Thank you, Ramon. Lori, there's some questions regarding buildings, so I'm going to try to capture these here. And there's a number of questions around the connection between the building legislative policies that we're putting forward and low income, low wealth communities. So how do we achieve advancements in building policy and make those advancements available for lower income neighborhoods, or without at least hurting those neighborhoods? So maybe a little bit about the equity aspects of that initiative.
Yeah, so it is certainly a significant challenge. And so I'm just going to break down a few pieces of that. So the first thing is that the policies that we're putting forward really are more for multifamily buildings, where it comes to energy efficiency in those buildings. So there are a number of ideas of really helping building owners to pay for those improvements. And the hope is that where there are government funds involved in retrofitting buildings, there can also be commensurate expectations with regard to particularly affordable housing. So that's really for the multifamily sector. Single family homes is separate. The one policy there really is around improving the access to empower energy efficiency funds for low income residents. And there's also a weatherization and health piece of that, and that's a very important piece. So again, trying to pay attention to the needs of those kinds of residents. And then just looking for ways to have low income renters or multifamily and single family electrify, because we do expect gas to increase in cost over time as more buildings move off of gas to electricity. We want to be sure that we're really centering low-income communities. So that's actually a recommendation of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change to electrify low income. That probably won't be a policy that's taken up this year, but it's very much front and center in our longer term legislative planning.
Thank you, Lori. Very helpful. And let me ask Victoria, I understand we're over. There's still 156 great, wonderful advocates online. So we're going to keep this going for just a few more moments. I'm sure nobody has anything else to do anyway. So Victoria, kind of a question around transitioning from the current energy sources that we have right now. We want to set bold goals. We want to reduce emissions. We want to get to net zero. You know, how can we as advocates and the state transition from where we are now to a clean sourced energy system?
That's a great question. And I think that speaks a lot to what Lori was just speaking about, having a larger platform in addition to the work we're doing in 2022. So in 2022, we're going to be doing a lot of work.
Yeah.
Victoria,
you froze. So let's just kind of start right over again.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that, everybody. But I wanted to speak a little bit about how we are not only working on a 2022 platform, but we have a larger, longer term goal of getting us to 100% renewable energy in the near future. And so as we work in 22 to prepare our electricity grid for the increase of demand, as we're electrifying vehicles and buildings, we're going to also need to clean up our energy sector. And so to be, succinct with it, we are going to be working in the next term on 100% renewable energy and decarbonizing our entire energy sector. But in the meantime, we need to be setting up the rest of the system to handle those changes and set those targets.
Excellent. Boy, we could keep going here, but I want to respect everybody's time. So Stacy, thank you if you have to run to another Zoom. Oh, may the force be with you. Before I lose you all, I want to actually make another final point here, and that is that this work is 365. And while the session is 3 months and we're gearing up and there's this great crescendo, the next big thing that's happening is November of 2022, and that's the election. And at that point, we get another chance to give our viewpoints and express our voice, and that's through our votes. And so keep engaged with all of us. We're working in that space, and we'll be having a lot of information and forums out there about that. So definitely sign up for the volunteer stuff. We'll get information, and I think with that, I'm going to bid everybody a great evening. I hope you have happy holidays. And I really do look forward to working with you in 2022 to get this bold, urgent, and a comprehensive package through. Take care, everyone. Good night.
Good night, everyone.